to another episode of Rock Boys Football heading into week 3. Who is on upset alert? And I think on paper, this is a sleepy Saturday of college football, not those marquee college football games that everybody's clearing their Saturday to sit down and watch. That being said, the college football fans who have followed this sport throughout the years know these sleepy Saturdays are normally when we see the most amount of chaos unfold. I'm sure every single one of y'all who are listening to this have some sort of game in mind that they have circled with Sharpie in terms of a potential upset brewing. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. This is all of our opportunities to kind of call our shots heading into week 3. So would love to hear from you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. And without further ado, let's get into this one and let's start with Tulane going on the road to play Oklahoma. Couple of different reasons you have this game circled. Now, I think before we entered into the 2024 season, I think you would have circled this game because it might have been kind of a look ahead game for Oklahoma, where they are playing Tennessee in their first SEC matchup next week. I don't think this is going to be a look ahead game for Oklahoma anymore, given how bad they looked against Houston in week 2. Like, I think this Oklahoma team will be ready to rock and roll in terms of playing Tulane. That being said, there are two reasons we're kind of putting this on upset alert. One, Oklahoma they haven't looked that good. They're banged up on the offensive line. They are banged up in the wide receiver room. The offense is one of the worst third down offenses that we see in the country through the first 2 weeks. Haven't had much success hitting the explosive plays that we're normally used to seeing Oklahoma hit. Struggling to run the football. Now they have a Tulane team coming in that just outgained Kansas State by over 100 yards in that week 2 matchup. Now I know they didn't win the football game, but they were very impressive against Kansas State. Darian Mensah, we kind of talked about this earlier in the week. You talk about an example of a quarterback that just slipped through the cracks during the high school recruiting trail. 6'3", 215 from California, can absolutely rip it as a redshirt freshman, but also a phenomenal athlete. I think this is a game that I think Oklahoma fans know. Like, you can't play the way you just played against Houston and expect to win this football game. And I think Tulane, quite frankly, is smelling blood in the water of an Oklahoma team that is trying to find their rhythm as they get into SEC play. So you combine Oklahoma not playing their best football, dealing with a laundry list of injuries at the wide receiver spot and on the offensive line. The offensive line has been shuffled consistently throughout the first 2 weeks. I think Tulane thinks they have a shot in this football game. And if they can play the way they played against Kansas State and we don't see Oklahoma put it together, this is going to be a dogfight in the fourth quarter. 13-point favorites for Oklahoma at home. I think this one could get very interesting Saturday afternoon. Next one I want to talk about, and probably one of the marquee matchups that we're going to see on Saturday. Let's go to an SEC matchup. LSU going on the road to play South Carolina. Now, I picked LSU to win this football game. I also picked LSU to cover the number. That being said, there are aspects of this game that I'm certain are kind of putting a little fear into LSU. I think most notably, this South Carolina pass rush is legit. Now, I think the question is, how legit are they, right? Playing Old Dominion, playing a Kentucky offensive line that just seemed to be a disaster. They're going up against what I think is the best offensive line in the country in LSU. That to me is going to be the key battle. Like, can South Carolina dominate up front like they've had the first 2 weeks on the defensive line? Probably the biggest question. I think Dylan Stewart, as a true freshman, is probably one of the best edge rushers that we've seen in the country throughout the first 2 weeks. That kid has been absolutely special and dominant as a true freshman, but it's a lot of other guys, right? Kyle Kennard, TJ Sanders. Can they have that level of disruption and playmaking ability against an LSU offensive line that has played so much football together, has two legitimate NFL tackles on both sides of the offensive line, a ton of experience on the inside? That's probably the question you have, right? South Carolina has had some success the first 2 weeks because they have dominated on the defensive line. Can they dominate LSU? That's a question. The other question I have is, one, can LSU stop the run? It's no secret that South Carolina is going to lean on Lenore Sellers and Rocket Sanders in the run game. LSU just gave up 150 rushing yards to Nichols last week. And so can South Carolina get the run game going early? Again, Williams-Brice Stadium is going. This is really the reason I have it on upset alert. I think this is going to be one of the best environments we see in week 3 of college football. I really like LSU, and I quite frankly do like how LSU matches up against South Carolina, because I think that LSU offensive line can at least somewhat neutralize what South Carolina has up front. and that has been the reason South Carolina's been winning football games. But we all know Lenore Sellers, if he is playing at a high level, has a lot of juice. Rocket Sanders, obviously very talented back, and this seems like a spot where Shane Beamer is going to have his guys ready to go. Rowdy environment, a must-watch football game. I think LSU can win this football game, but it's certainly one that if you're looking for an upset, you might have one noon on Saturday. Next one I want to talk about in another road underdog in a very hostile environment. Texas A&M going into the Swamp. Now, this made the list because I look at Connor Wigman questionable for this football game coming out Thursday night. I don't know if that's the biggest story. I think the biggest storyline is what does this Florida team, what does the Florida crowd look like Saturday at 3:30? I think the biggest storyline is DJ Lagway doing what he did week 2. I think that has energized this Florida fan base. Like, they have some hope in terms of it's going to get better after a very disappointing week 1 against Miami. Now, I think the big question mark is Texas A&M defensive line. I think one of the best in the country, going up against the Florida offensive line that whether it's Graham Mertz, whether it's DJ Lagway, we have massive question marks about what Florida can do in pass protection. That's probably the biggest storyline is if Texas A&M can just overwhelm Florida up front and really impact the quarterback. Texas A&M probably wins this football game. Can Billy Napier and this Florida offensive staff figure out a way to get the football out quick, get a little bit of a run game to lean on? That's probably one of the questions. I think the second question is Connor Wigman in this Texas A&M offense. Like, it hasn't been great, and I don't think we're leaving the McNeese game and saying, "Oh, Texas A&M's back on offense." It was a disaster against Notre Dame, who doesn't seem to be as good of a team as we kind of thought they were following that week 1 win. So how good is this Texas A&M team really? And then what does this Florida team look like after a very disappointing start to their 2024 season? This game feels massive for both programs in terms of where this season goes for them throughout the 2024 year. Big time eyeballs. Texas A&M coming on the road as 3.5-point favorites. Going to be a really fun football game. Going to number 4. Let's talk about Notre Dame going on a road. Another road underdog in Purdue. Just kind of a head scratcher from Notre Dame week 2 against Northern Illinois. And I think the biggest concern for the Notre Dame fans, that wasn't really a fluke game. Like, Northern Illinois went on the road, ran the football for 190 yards. Riley Leonard in this passing attack struggled immensely. Weren't really able to get the run game going like they did against Texas A&M. Look, Purdue going into year 2 under Ryan Walters, I expect a massive improvement from this Purdue defense because I trust Ryan Walters in terms of what he can do on the defensive side of the football. And then you look at Notre Dame struggling to stop the run against Northern Illinois. Purdue is going to throw a lot of different looks in terms of how they want to run the football. I think they're quite two-dimensional with Hudson Card at quarterback. This is one of those games that if we don't see a bounce back from Notre Dame, they are certainly on upset alert on the road against Purdue. And you know this Purdue team is not only smelling blood in the water, but they're fired up because I think they watched Notre Dame week 2 and say, hey, we can go win this football game. And so I think this is a really fascinating matchup. Last one I want to go to, and really just the probably the hardest game to get a read on that we're going to see Saturday, Memphis going on the road to Florida State. Why I have this as an upset alert is, one, if Florida State plays the way they did the first 2 weeks of the season, they're going to lose this football game. Florida State has gotten dominated on both sides of the line of scrimmage. The quarterback play has not been good enough. They're not tackling in space. What does this Florida State team look like after the bye? Because I think we all know what this Florida State team can look like when they are firing on all cylinders. They've been anything but that throughout the first 2 weeks of the season, or first 2 games of the season for Florida State. And then you look at Memphis and say, normally I probably wouldn't add this to the sheet because you got group of 5 team going on the road to Florida State. They got a quarterback in Seth Hennigan who is going into his 4th year as a starting quarterback, one of the most productive and experienced quarterbacks that we see in the country, with a very good running back in Mario Anderson. I think this is a game that, look, I give Memphis the advantage in the quarterback play by a pretty significant margin so far. And I also think Florida State at home is not necessarily the advantage we might think, because what happens if DJU has 2 straight 3-and-outs to start this football game? I mean, the Luke or Brock Lenchants are going to get going. I think this is one of those situations where, and we saw this with DJU at Clemson too, like the home field advantage when DJU is not playing well and there's some young talented quarterbacks that are sitting on the bench, that home field advantage quickly can turn into not so much of an advantage if DJU continues to struggle running this offense. And quite frankly, I don't know if there's going to be as much juice in this Florida State stadium as we're used to seeing. And as a guy that we've talked a lot of Florida State football, I don't necessarily blame the fans because one, I've heard the stadium experience has been not very good. The product on the field has not been very good. We'll see what the environment looks like. I think it's going to get loud in terms of the backup quarterbacks coming in from Florida State if DJU struggles. And you have a quarterback in Seth Hennigan that if you're not playing your best football, he is going to make you pay at the quarterback spot. Those are the 5 games that I'm taking a look at. Memphis is probably the one that I feel most strongly about. As 7-point dogs on the road could certainly win this football game. I think the odds, the 7-point odds, I don't know what the books know what to do with Florida State yet because it is a very hard team. They were valued extremely high. They were the favorite to win the ACC, and all of a sudden they're looking like a middle of the pack team in the landscape of college football. So we'll see how this game plays out. Massive game for Florida State. Those are the 5 games I have on upset alert. I think Oregon State could certainly be a sneaky one as well. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, let it fly in the comment section with your upsets. Call your shots in the comment section. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all